And that's one of the goals that we're trying to make.
Great, perfect. So the next benefit of TIFs is tax shift benefit. So I'm going to review this financial concept. I don't know if this is something that is already well known to you all, but the concept here is that as assessed value in a community grows overall, you've got that state valuation figure that is equalized across all of the towns in the state. And that number is factored into the calculation of a general purpose aid to education, municipal revenue sharing, as well as if you're in a school district, it's often used for additional local budget funds, and then your county tax obligation. And the theory is that as you get more value in your municipality, you have a better ability to pay for things on your own, you need less subsidy, you can afford to pay more in county tax, and that's the general concept of the rationale for state valuation to factor into those calculations. What the TIF statute does is that any portion of your state value, of your assessed value in your community that is captured in a TIF district, that is not part of your state valuation number for purposes of calculating those subsidies. And so another way I like to talk about it is on the next slide. And I haven't run these numbers in Oakland for quite a while, but if you go to the next slide there, Gary, it shows a dollar.
The one after this one here?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so one way of looking at it is that for every new tax dollar that is paid, the town actually only receives some percentage of that dollar ultimately, because for having new tax revenue, you will get penalized on those subsidy calculations. Every community gets penalized to a lesser or greater extent. So, you know, and it's a lagged impact, so your state valuation this year that's factored into those calculations for subsidies is actually your values from a few years back. So it takes some time to recognize the impact, but there is certainly an impact of having the new value come in and getting that new tax revenue. It's good to get it, but you only actually get something like perhaps 50%. The range is, and Gary, do you know offhand what approximately was? I wish I had looked that up before I came out on the drive. I was kicking myself, but I can follow back up. I haven't done it, and it changes over time, so I think the last time we ran those was at least 4 years ago.
55.
That would not surprise me.
That number's like ringing a bell in my mind. Yeah,
that wouldn't surprise me. So the impact really is that if you capture dollars in a TIF fund, and instead of just letting them go to the general fund as in the normal course, you can use the full dollar as long as you're using it on those restricted items. So it's a trade-off, but again, that's why I said you want to really think about what you're already spending out of your general fund on economic development, because then you really have a financial incentive to put one of these districts in place for that reason. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
So it sounds like the downside would be if you developed a TIF district, let's say you fixed up the downtown and you built some tall buildings and stuff, and you ended up needing more police protection or more fire equipment or something. And you really you have to cover all the taxes you've had before, plus the new expenses that you have because of the TIF district. So you need to be darn sure that you include increased costs in equipment and stuff that you will need in the TIF district, in that district. And you're saying you can do that?
Yeah, there are some restrictions on certain what they call really general governmental costs that the DECD decides are not to economic development. But in that second category of costs, the costs made necessary by or related to the district development, some of what you're talking about is exactly that. So you would include, additional fire trucks are often included in this because there's a new building that's going to be taller than all your other buildings. And so TIF revenues can pay for that. And sort of other capital in nature costs. Operating costs are harder. The operating costs that are permissible relate to economic development. So to the extent you have some portion of your staff's salaries devoted to economic development activities, then that can be paid for. But other operating costs are harder to get approved. But you raise a point, I think, which is really important, which is, do you want development? Because you do have to account for the fact that it comes with some additional costs of services that the municipality has to provide. And if that's the course and that's the goal of the community, great. And then let's try to find a way that we can account for what those costs are going to be and pay for them in a more cost-effective way. So that's part of the concept, but I think it's worthwhile to have that conversation about, what type of development do we want to incentivize here, and are we prepared to take on those additional costs, and are we informed about what they are?
Sure, the goal that in my head that I've got is to fix our downtown. To have the revenues to actually improve its appearance and improve its function. And the other thing is we've developed a broadband committee. The whole goal of that committee was to develop a broadband or fiber optics for our downtown businesses because it has an attraction, and it's going to come to a cost for the taxpayers. And this would allow us to shuffle that money to use it for those types of projects.
Yep.
I don't think we're going to be building skyscrapers in Oakland anytime soon, but we have some work to do down there.
Well, and that's exactly some of the reasons I see across the state for putting downtowns in place. Particularly, it's a redevelopment effort. It's already a downtown, and so you find that the original assessed value is actually fairly high. And this is something we should talk a little bit about if you want to pursue this. Is do you anticipate new investment, new assessed value in the area that we're talking about? Because if you don't, then you won't actually create much revenue. And so we just a planning point, and one option within the TIF statute is that some other districts in your community, depending on whether they can meet certain criteria, can send TIF revenue to your downtown project costs if you have a downtown TIF that's not generating enough revenue to cover what you want to do. So if you happen to have some other project that's not in your downtown that will create some increment, that's a feature that just to know about. It may just not apply here at all, but we would get to a point in this process where we'd run some projections of what we expect this district to create in revenue, and we'd want to base that on, do you know if this particular address is going to be building something new, or is there a fit up that would create some new revenue, or is it just going to be over time assessed values will go up and that will affect what you're going to generate. Okay, any other questions for the moment? Yeah.
So when the assessed value of the base, in your example, $1 million, down the road, 10 years, when that assessed value has gone from $1 million to $1.2 million, that $200,000 in taxable stuff goes into the TIF, or it stays with the base?
So if you...
The increase in the value of whatever is your base to begin with, does that get into the TIF, or does it get into the general fund?
If you designate a TIF district and set the original value at the time when it's $1 million, and then after that point there's $200,000 worth of assessed value added, then the taxes paid on that $200,000 of value would go into your TIF fund. So another feature you should know about, though, is that you don't, as a community, have to capture all 100% of that $200,000. You could decide to capture 50% of it, and then the taxes on $100,000 would go to the general fund, and the taxes on the other $100,000 would go to the TIF fund. You only receive the tax shift benefit associated with the percentage that you capture. But still that then, some communities like that balancing, because then, you know, you still have revenue that's being generated from new projects that is available to just all the governmental expenses, not expenditures, as opposed to just the economic development. And it really depends upon what you expect your project costs list will be comprised of. You know, and if you think all those potential TIF revenues will be used up very easily, then you may want to consider 100%. And yeah, so this is important stuff to think about. This I already kind of started to talk about half of them have credit enhancement agreements in the state, but there are approximately 500 active TIF districts in the state. And there are different types of districts, which we'll get into as well. I haven't actually looked at the spreadsheet, the active TIF district spreadsheet, in a few months, but it's now kind of evened out to 500 because we're at the point where districts are starting to expire. So, but it's very popular program. I think if you talk to economic development professionals in the state, they feel like this is the program that we have available to us in Maine, as opposed to some other states where there are a lot more resources out there for businesses. So that's at least the sentiment I hear from that group. So special types of districts, and we already started talking a little bit about downtown TIFs, which I think is worth us talking about further. One, you get relief from some of those caps, the statutory requirements, by creating a downtown TIF district. In order to create a downtown TIF district, you have to be able to, with a straight face, say this area is the kind of social, economic, governmental center of our community. And so, you know, there would be some effort to try and figure out where the boundaries of that actually are. And then in addition to the development program document that's required for every TIF district, you have to, as a community, adopt a downtown redevelopment plan, which is a planning document as opposed to an economic development TIF document. And so that document needs to be approved before the development program and the designation of the district gets approved. Can happen the same night if you go through that planning process, that's fine too. And then that document gets submitted to the state for review, as well as the development program. They don't have any sort of reviewing authority to say it's a bad plan or a good plan, but it's just a statutory requirement for a downtown TIF to get approved that you submit that. And what happens procedurally is that there are 2 other state agencies that are required to offer what they call advisories on your downtown redevelopment plan. And actually, sometimes it's good feedback. The DOT offers some feedback, as well as what used to be the state planning office. It's now like the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and something else. But they're the function within that department that considers planning issues, offers an advisory, and you don't have to do anything with them, but you can receive those, and DECD needs that before they can approve your downtown TIF district. So that sometimes can be a deterrent for municipalities, frankly, that downtown redevelopment plan, because if you weren't already thinking you were going to do this, it is an extra process. And so I will say I've had a couple of communities who said, we want to do a downtown TIF, and then they heard about that obligation and felt they were too strapped to take it on, and instead just did a regular TIF in their downtown area. They just didn't call it a downtown TIF. So I just thought I'd throw that option out there because people have gone in that direction. You don't then get relief from the statutory caps. And
Say
so
that again. I'm sorry.
you then don't have relief from the statutory caps. And for downtown districts, the one that might be more difficult is the original assessed value, which all the original assessed values of all your TIF districts in your town have to be less than 5% of your total assessed value in your town. Sometimes downtown TIFs, OAVs are really high because that's where all the value is. I'm not sure that's really what would happen here, but it may not matter. Those caps and statutory restrictions may not be a factor for you all, and maybe not doing the official downtown TIF is something to consider. I mean, I think a planning effort is sometimes really helpful. You could really create what your goals are, but I just have seen some municipalities say, you know, we know what we want to do, we just want to do a TIF.
We're right fresh off from a comprehensive plan, so I mean, it wouldn't be too much of a push for us to fire that back up and do a downtown planning.
Okay, yeah. And you probably have a lot of people who are sort of just trained to do that work, and just would be a smaller, narrower focus.
I know my downtown business people who love to see something like this.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's good. So the other couple of special types I wanted to just address, transit-oriented TIF districts. I don't know if transit is something that is an issue in Oakland, but you can create a transit-oriented TIF district that would allow for some amount of operating costs of new or expanded transit services to be paid for with TIF revenues, and then also capital costs of transit. But transit-oriented districts and downtown districts can be one and the same. So you can do a transit-oriented / downtown TIF district if you wanted to incorporate some of those newer expanded transit service costs, if that's applicable.
So transit costs could be covered on something like this if we wanted to hire a company to come in to offer transit to people downtown, bring them to neighboring communities. That would be something that we could.
Yeah, so there are regional transit authorities that a lot of municipalities in Maine participate in. It's not like a municipal transit authority, it's a regional one. And so whatever you pay to participate in that, a portion of that can be paid for with TIF